Great to have you on.
I'm grateful to be here. This is an honor.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit before we started about daily routine.
Yeah.
You did a cold dip this morning.
I did, yeah. The cold dip and the cold therapy is obviously becoming very popular in the world, but I guess for me, it's always been something I've been fascinated with. Like even just coming to Iceland, that was a part of that experience was, 12 years ago or more, coming here and realizing that there are hot springs, but there's also these incredible, beautiful, cold rivers everywhere in the ocean. And so I think that, desire to, be in the heat and then go into the cold and then kind of, I have this desire to be immersed in water. Like water is really important to me. Maybe my wife says it's because I'm a Pisces, the fish.
Okay.
But I've realized as I've gotten older that, I've always felt comfortable and safe in a place where I can see the ocean. And there are people that I've met that grew up in landlocked areas, like in Texas or inland Texas or Arizona or Utah, where like they never grew up seeing the ocean. And to them, the ocean can sometimes be like kind of concerning. Like they're afraid of it because you look out and it's just, there's nothing there. That's it. You feel kind of unsafe. But I guess for me, like being surrounded by the sea gives me calm and peace. I really like it. Mm-hmm. And I think that with that, I just want to be immersed in it. So sorry, it's a long answer, but I love water. It's a big part of my life. And it's kind of a constant theme in my life for trying to find peace.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you, 100%.
Yeah.
And don't apologize for long answers.
Good.
We have a good time. No, but I grew up in the city, and for me it's kind of strange if I don't have mountains or water, preferably both.
Yeah.
Then I start to feel, I don't know if I should say claustrophobic.
Yeah.
After a few days, if I'm in Paris or London or New York or somewhere, 4 or 5 days is okay. But after that, I start to feel like I need some nature or something to escape to.
I totally agree. It's funny you say that because for me, the limit is 3 days. Like having been to New York many times, after about the 3-day mark, I start to get anxious. I start to get a little irritable, and I crave for as wild as my life has been and how much I've been traveling over the years, I actually crave routine. I really crave the ability to like wake up and have exercise and eat this meal and then go have my, spend my time with my kids or my whatever it looks like. And I think that's what's tough about being in those places where your routine is totally thrown off and you're kind of trying to find a sense of normalcy. It becomes challenging, but I feel like I've found healthy practices to exist in those more intense environments in the cities. I admire people who can thrive there. Mm-hmm. Truly, I admire people who can like go and, continue to be in a Zen state or be healthy or whatever. I feel like I go there and I'm just anxious and, eating my way through everything and then like living my best life. And that's just not sustainable when you travel a lot because then you're constantly in a state of like celebrating and you're never really grounded, So
how do you merge it? Like, because I really connect with what you're saying about wanting to be spontaneous, wanting to have all these experiences and wanting, but at the same time, if I don't have a stable routine, I start to get like kind of disconnected.
Yeah.
What are if you're, let's say your
like tips or tricks kind of thing, or
what, if you're doing long photo shoots or you have to travel long days, what are your like go-to things to ground yourself?
That's an excellent question, and I honestly feel like so many artists out there, the one thing they never talk about is burnout. It's so easy to get burnt out. It's so easy to get burned out, doing more of the same all the time. It's a funny thing because you kind of get celebrated, you get sought after because you did that one thing or you shot that one image or you made that one film or wrote that one book. And then people want you to repeat it. And it's kind of like a musician going and touring and playing their old songs that they're like, I hate these songs. But as the viewer, you know, as the person who's at the concert, you're like, I want to hear that song. That's my song. It's kind of changed. It's kind of made me realize that, in fact, life is not about finding balance. It's about finding rhythm. And I think that rhythm requires ups and downs. And those dips, those highs and lows, the ups and downs, they can be dramatic or they can be really small, right? But that's how it's always going to be. We're always going to have a part of our day where we're slightly anxious or nervous or having to make a decision. It's not always going to be linear and perfect, you know? Exactly. And then there's going to be parts that just flow and are easy and we just glide through it. For me, the answer to that question is honestly not about finding balance when I am traveling and, rhythm, when I'm traveling or I'm in those spontaneous experiences. It's about finding that at home and filling up my cup. Like I think of it like a well, and I need to fill up that well with water, and I need to make deposits in that well so that when I'm on a trip or I'm on a job or I'm being asked a lot of me and I'm working 110%, I am able to pull from that well and pull and pull and pull and pull. And you know what? Sometimes you get to the bottom of that well and it's dry. And that's the point you realize, like, whoa, I either A, didn't invest enough, or B, I overdrew. And when I mean investing, that's the key thing here is like, what does that mean? What does it mean to like put back into that well, this reservoir of energy, excitement, sleepless nights, whatever. For me, for everybody, it looks like something different. For me, it looks like exercise, time with my family, time with my kids, time for myself, maybe even just detoxing a bit from social media. I tend to kind of detox a bit from social media before I go on a trip because I know that when I'm on that trip, it's going to be emails and online and searching constantly for this and working and all those things. And so I try to make these small investments like today and yesterday. It was up at 5:30 a.m., go to the gym, then stay at the gym a little longer and just do some cardio. And then, so I'll take a class, I'll do some cardio, and then I'll do a cold dip. And like, that's my morning. And I usually think about the fact that like, if I do that at the beginning of my day or whatever your routine looks like, maybe you do yoga, maybe you read, maybe you make some tea. I'm like, nothing else that happens in the day can mess up my day because I gave myself something. I like gave my body and my mind really equally I gave something to it. I'm asking stuff of my body all the time and I'm asking stuff of my mind all the time. That's where creativity comes from.
Exactly.
And if we don't give anything back to it in terms of like healthy food, time with people we love, et cetera, then we get burnt out quick. So that's kind of my contribution to the well, because I know that on Friday, I'm going to be going to California, working on a Nat Geo assignment, hiking in the Sierra, shooting the landscapes up at like 9,000 feet, 3,000 meters. Like, so I'm going to be working hard. And even though I am, exercising and stuff, it's exhausting. You're exhausted emotionally being away. You're exhausted because you're away from family and friends and places you love and all those things. So, I kind of tend to hone in when I have a job coming up or I have a long trip coming up. And usually my work, luckily, isn't like crazy spontaneous. I'm not just like, let's go for a 30-day trip tomorrow. I'm thinking about it. I'm planning it out. I have time to make a decision.
How about the physical aspect? Like I hadn't thought of that. Like when you're a photographer, are you doing a lot of things that are demanding physically? Like you're saying now, like hiking up 9,000 feet and.
Yeah, I mean, what's wild is it's kind of like the hidden. It's sort of like the part that people don't really realize is that if you are going to be and I hate to use this word, but like an adventure photographer, because it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's true. Like you need to be in shape because oftentimes, I grew up shooting action sports, surfing, climbing, skiing, all those things. I would have to carry the same equipment as everybody else, but a camera also. So you have to be in as good a shape or better than those people, world-class athletes, and of course you never will be, it's just not possible, if you want to keep up with them. Right? Like nobody wants to wait for you. Oh, like there's the camera guy, 20, like, you know, let's wait 30 minutes. Like, you know, the sunrise is not going to wait, you know, like all those things. So you need to really, that's the thing. Like when I'm preparing for ski season, I'm like preparing for ski season. I'm like doing lifts and doing squats and working out and making sure that like I can carry the load up mountains, you know, and as much as I love, you know, cycling or surfing or other things, it's so important to realize that your body can only be trained to optimize one thing at a time. You know, I know that very well because this summer I raced the Tour Divide, which is a bike route that goes from Canada to Mexico to 2,700 miles, 4,200 kilometers. And then I came to Iceland and I ran 2 ultra marathons, and I was training for both those at the same time. Okay. And that was really hard because your body's trying to do one thing and then trying to do another thing, different muscle groups, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a physicality to photography. I think that if you aspire to take photographs in remote places, you need to be able to access those places and not only get there, but feel comfortable, feel safe, feel grounded, not feel like your adrenals are like up here and you're like stressed out, you know, like, oh my God, I've never been on the top of a mountain before. And now I've got to be creative. Well, creativity, it comes from a place of, I think, like calm.
It does.
It really does. And you know, what's interesting. And I think that there are some artists that maybe don't agree with me, but, I always find it's really hard to produce your best work when you come to a place for the first time. The first time I came to Iceland as a young, budding photographer, I was like taking photos out the window, driving past, you know, Skogafoss and all the, like driving, you know, 90 kilometers an hour, like just like, you know, I was obsessed with everything. I was like, this is so beautiful, very overwhelmed. And of course I stopped and I composed images, but I was so eager to see it all that I was focusing on quantity over quality. And now it's more about quality over quantity. If I can shoot one really, really good image a month, I'm happy. And I would rather do it in a way where I'm calm and focused and not stressed out and not anxious and those things.
But this thing you're talking about, like, I feel like quantity over quality is kind of the motto in the Western world right now. Like, which is normal because it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's usually your brain is telling you, I need the quantity to get paid. Yeah. So,
well, and social media teaches us that, right? It's like, it's like if you had the best podcast you've done ever and you released one a year, people would be like, awesome, but where's the next one? You know,
exactly.
Like, and it's the same thing for me. People in the world, they look at your work and they don't really realize how much effort went into getting that one shot. A lot of times when I'm creating something I'm really proud of, it's the byproduct of having, you know, gone to that place multiple times, investing tons of energy, money, you know, the gas, the food to get there, searching, seeing what the light is doing, and then making a decision to shoot it then. And it's lost on people. You know, social media is like a garbage can where you're just with no bottom, and it feels like you're just tossing stuff into the can expecting it to fill up and be full, but it never is full. It has an endless appetite.
But this journey of yours, like, do you remember a point in your life where there was a transition where you started to allow yourself to go for the quality over the quantity? Because
absolutely.
For me, I'm in that place right now where I feel like finally I'm like starting to realize sometimes it's about learning to say no.
You took the words from my mouth. I read a book maybe 3-4 years ago now called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. You would love it because it's literally about
essentialism.
Yeah, it's called Essentialism. And Greg McKeown was like somebody who consulted, you know, all kinds of Silicon Valley, like, you know, CEOs and whatnot, and more helping them to deal with making important decisions. And how do we make important decisions? Not just in business, but in life. How do we find out what we want, what we need? And his big takeaway from the book is learning to say no is actually saying yes to what you want. And so I grew up in this we call it in the States blue collar family. Like, my mom, my dad worked and my whole life, and my dad still is working. And, he was a blue collar worker. He mowed lawns, a gardener, right? And he worked so hard to provide for us. And the idea that you would ever turn down work was like foreign. It was like sacrilegious. I might as well have been like giving myself lashes on the back, like you don't do that in a blue collar family. You accept every opportunity that's given to you because it might be your last, or and because it's scarce. There's not tons of work. And so I grew up, I'm not ashamed to say this, but kind of as like a workaholic, work came before health, work came before family sometimes, work came before friends for sure. And I managed to keep my relationship with my wife, of course, but it was really like, that was it. And I think that's a dangerous game that we play. And I think it took me a long time to recognize what you're saying, which is that I can say no and it's okay. I'm still relevant. People still care about me as an artist. Like just because I turned down that one job doesn't mean that, I'm going to fade away into to be obsolete. Right. But we kind of convince ourselves that's the case. And I guess what I've realized is that why would I accept work or jobs or opportunities if I know that I'm not going to put forth my best work? And I think that as I realized that, I had to say no to certain things to kind of protect my creativity, my energy, my existence. And so that when I do say yes to a job, I know I'm giving 110%. Like I know it. I always do.
Do you feel like there was a point when you started
recognizing
to really feel like you're getting rewarded for that kind of a mindset? That is like, in some wowie way, the universe is rewarding you for.
Well, I will say this: my relationship with my wife improved. My relationship with my kids improved. I mean, not to get too personal here, but like, there's something to be said for somebody who's really good at one thing, really good at work, whatever that work is, and then you have kids, and then you're like, well, these kids are, they're a handful. And it's an emotional thing, and it's hard, and you're like, well, I'm not good at being a dad, but I am good at working. Why don't I go to where I'm good? Why don't I lean into where I know I'm appreciated, where I know I can bring in money? And then you convince yourself, you're like, well, if I work more, I can provide more for the family and I can ease their burdens. But really, they don't need that. They need you. And it's so challenging to look back. And I think that I've always been good in life at looking at where I've been and seeing the mistakes I've made and trying to like learn from my own mistakes. I've never been able to learn from others, but I've been able to learn from my own. And yeah, there was a point in my mid-20s. I had my first son at 26, which I know is a little late for Icelanders, but it's young for Californians. It's young for Westerners. So I had my first son at 26, and by the time I hit like 30, I started to realize, I'm 37 now. I started to realize like, whoa, I'm missing out, and I wasn't happy. And even though the jobs that I was doing were exciting, every opportunity was cool and exciting and really amazing. Like I feel lucky to have gotten so many awesome projects over the years, but I was giving up something of myself to do them. And it was more than just time and attention and focus. It was like I was giving up a piece of me, because I knew that I needed to be somewhere else, or I knew that I needed to focus on my mental health or my physical health, or you know what I mean? So I think there were a lot of improvements. Yeah, physical, mental, emotional, family relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And I just tried to prioritize those things, as painful as it was. It's hard to go to a place where you're outside your comfort zone. But that's what's so funny is I preach that to everybody. Live outside your comfort zone, blah, 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 blah. This is where life is, you need, and then I wasn't following my own advice because I was too busy doing the things that I knew, to me, although they might have appeared scary to other people, doing, going and surfing in remote, Arctic Circle or wherever it is. That's just what I became comfortable with.
Exactly.
And so even though it looks from the outside like, wow, what a daredevil, so cool, I love what he's doing, it's like I was actually taking myself away from the place that I should have been, where the real growth happens.
Yeah. No, I relate to that. I think sometimes I've thought like me going out of my comfort zone would actually be staying at home for a whole day.
So true. That would be mine too. Like just cuddling up in blankets, drinking tea, like giving myself a massage or something. Like that would be like, I would stress out. I've thought about that. And what's funny is that's why I'm in Iceland. Like it is that experience that brought me to Iceland and my wife, is that we were so comfortable in California that no growth was happening. And I'm super lucky. I've got a cool house there, and we have some property, and I worked really, really hard for all of those things. And they gave me so much, but I felt like I was not where I should be. And every time I travel here, I was like, this is where I want to be. I want to feel the seasons. And
what is it? What is it about Iceland? Because when you talk about California, it's like a really, really
paradise.
Yeah, it's a really. I mean, the weather is usually always good.
Awesome.
You have variety of everything.
But people are apathetic, and you don't know your neighbor. You don't know your neighbor at all. And I know that like that word community is thrown around a lot. It's thrown around. It's kind of a buzzword. But in Iceland, if I could sum it up for you in the most simple way possible, like there is a saying in Iceland, "Þetta, which everybody knows means it'll all work out. And that saying, as silly as it is, which it's not silly, but as commonplace as it is, that saying, it really sums up the perspective of the country. And I don't mean that in that it's lazy. I mean it in that people live in the moment, because you cannot plan for a wedding 6 months from now. You don't know what the weather's going to do. You don't know if there's going to be a volcanic eruption and ash is going to blow onto your farm. For thousands of years, people here have been forced to live in the moment. And living in the moment and not looking too far ahead and not looking back. Yes, it has its disadvantages. If I can be so bold, Icelanders sometimes are challenged with the decision to make short-term solutions to long-term problems sometimes, but it's so beautiful that they're able to exist in the here and now and like live for today. And I think that is what I need more of. And that's why I wanted to be here. I want to exist in that same space. And the spontaneity of the people is beautiful.
What about the like coming from a place like California where you have this stability with the weather and everything? Was that not a challenge for you to have this kind of a weather?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, but you kind of go crazy when you basically all year round you have, shorts and a t-shirt, and maybe in the middle of the winter you have a sweatshirt on. Like I have a closet full of rain shells. I never have to wear them, and here I like the change in the weather. Like it changes you as a person. Like, in the winter things slow down and it's dark and you're kind of, the communities almost get closer at that time. You get closer with your family. You get, you're eating soup. I don't know, like you're warming yourself up. That's a beautiful experience. And in California, the mindset is like, go, 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 because you always can go. You have no excuse not to. Yeah, I'll see you at this time tomorrow. Well, there's nothing the weather's not going to stop you. There's not going to be any issues. And I think that in that society where capitalism rules everything, and you don't really look out for your neighbor, you look out for yourself. My kids didn't have relationships that they were excited about. We didn't really connect with other parents. Like, I don't know how to tell you, but it's moving here. I feel like I've actually learned what it means to have community. Like, you look out for each other, and that's amazing. My kids literally have their freedom back. They've never in their life had as much freedom as they've had here. The fact that they can ride their bike to the school, and then ride their bike to football, and then ride their bike to the store. Like, I know that people here appreciate it, but I don't think they fully realize how scary it is being in the States. And
what's scary about being in the States?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I live in like one of the best communities you could ever live in, Central California. I'm far from the cities. I'm not in LA or San Francisco. It's a beautiful community, but I would never in a million years let my kids ride their bikes down to like the local store. And
why not? Is it because of like all the guns or
just because of everything? Because of the fact that like, you know, having your child, you know, taken from you is a real concern. It is a legitimate, real concern, you know, and then you have beyond that, you have people that are homeless, and then you have people that are on drugs, and you have a lot of things. And it, you know, I live in this tiny, tiny town, but in my high school, there was a gun brought to school. In my child's school, my son, like there was a threat where the police had to come. In a high school just 20 minutes north of me, there was a gun brought to school. There isn't a single situation where I haven't heard or seen that become a real issue.
It's so crazy.
It honestly is. And what's wild is that all people hear about are the bad ones. The times where people actually, someone got shot and it's a really bad situation and people died and things like that. And I don't want to, you know, bore people with all these, you know, like, you know, heavy topics, but it's the truth. And knowing that, you know, for me, yeah, it would be nice to have a couple more, you know, 70-degree Fahrenheit days in Iceland a year. But I also look at the fact that like my kids have their freedom, and that's incredible. And like watching them grow as they have like is amazing. And so I'm also like, there's sacrifices I make that aren't just for me, it's for them and my wife. So
it's interesting. I agree with the fact or what you said about Icelanders not fully realizing, like we know it's safe here, we know it's free, but you don't fully. I remember when I was in California for 3 months in 2017 and 18.
Okay. Where were you in California?
I was mostly in LA, and I was a little bit in Orange County, and I went up to San Francisco. I was driving all over.
Okay,
but
cool.
I remember every other person that I met there was on their way to moving to Europe, and the number one reason why was safety.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, wow, like safety is not a word that's even in the top 10 list if I'm thinking about.
No. I mean, imagine driving from Hafnarfjörður to Reykjavik, and you're in traffic, and it's one of those trafficy days in Reykjavik, and like if you were to like honk your horn, that person could like drive their car into you, and then that could create an altercation that could end up in gunshots. That's what LA traffic is like. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I grew up in it. I have lived there. Like it's hectic. And these things happen. And it's not like, I mean, I had an amazing childhood. I, spent time all over California and have been to all the cities, and certain parts of those cities I would just never go to because they're dangerous and scary. And I think that what's challenging is that you feel a little bit like you are, like I live in this great little area, but it is a little area. Like it's just, it's not like the whole state. You don't really venture out of your area is what I'm saying. And in Iceland, anywhere you go, you're going to find the same level of safety, even more. Or you're going to find the same level of like people wanting to help you, or the same level of beauty. And I laughed because I was talking with my wife and my kids. Like we would often go up to Utah to go skiing from my house. It's a 14-hour drive, right? 14 hours, or you fly. And if you fly, it's, whatever, a 3-hour flight, an hour and a half drive and a 3-hour flight, whatever. But the point is like, you leave my house on the coast. It's beautiful there. The beach, the sand, waves, all that stuff. And then you drive inland California, and then it's like you're in the inland valleys. And I know you've driven through it, the 5 freeway. Like, it's not cool. Like, it is not a great environment. It smells like, cows and methane and everything, and it's nasty. And then all of a sudden you get into the desert, and then you're in Vegas, and maybe that's what people want to see. I don't know. Not me. I'm not really a fan. And then you're in a trucking lane for like 10 hours. Like, of 10 hours of that drive is really not great. The last couple, you're in Utah, and then you're driving up to the mountains, and then you're in Salt Lake City, which is a city, and then all of a sudden you're in the mountains, and it's great. But I guess what I'm pointing at is like, if you were to drive to the furthest point of Iceland at any moment, it's going to be beautiful.
True.
Like, it's an enjoyable drive.
True.
There's nowhere you drive where you're not an hour from a hot spring or from a beautiful waterfall or a place you could like pull your car off and just stop. And I guess that's what I wish, is that more people who live in this country and experience this country and visit this country will appreciate that, because it is really special. And I know sometimes it's like, hey, we're just trying to get from Reykjavik to Akureyri and back, and it's for business or work or skiing or whatever. But the fact that for the most part, at any point you could pull off and like drink clean water, that is mind blowing. And never in a million years would I do that. Like maybe in the mountains where I live, like if I were to drive to the mountains, you know, a couple hours and then hike up as far as I can go, those streams would be clean and pure. Maybe.
Gotcha.
But never in a million years would I pick up water off the side of the road anywhere between, you know, in those places. So
I hear so many people talk about they come here, especially for the first time. They have this one word that's purity. That Iceland is so pure.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the more time you spend here and live here and see the entirety of the country, I think that you realize that, you know, the nature absolutely is pure, but Iceland suffers from, you know, complicated issues like anywhere else. And it's funny because I think that I'm only talking from my experience, that I've chatted with so many tourists and travelers and people who love this place. And I think that in the beginning, they think that all of Iceland is like one big national park. and they don't fully realize, like, well, yes, you know, kind of yes and no. Like places are, I think nature is more protected. Nature is more nurtured here. But like anywhere else, it deals with its issues, you know, extractive industries and you know, people trying to take advantage of every square inch they can. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of environmental agencies over the years in the States and in other places. And I know there's a give and take. Like you have mouths to feed. There are people that live here. You need jobs. It's a very complicated issue. You need the good and the bad. And that's just how the US is too. You know, probably maybe a little more bad than good. But I see it for what it is now more. And I still love it. I love every aspect of it. But it is pure. Like it really is pure. Like the fact that the rivers are clean. Yeah, exactly. And the water is clean. And the food, for the most part, like if you're buying food from here, it's clean. It's amazing, you know?
I would want to talk to you a little bit about the journey of, like, now you have, almost 4 million people on your Instagram.
Yeah, like, it's crazy.
Going, like you talked about the social media being like a what did you say, like a garbage can or something where you just dump.
I mean, that's a poor example, because I love social media. I love what it provides. But I guess what I mean is there is an insatiable appetite for content. And people are never going to be full. You're never going to share that one podcast or that one photo, and people are like, oh, I'm content for a week or a month, you know?
So, but what would you say is the key, like grinding yourself or finding a way to get through? I mean, there are so many people who want to be full-time photographers.
Yeah.
Let alone, and then even being bigger and being big on social media. What would you say is the key?
I think that what people often dismiss is the fact that I would never want to be a full-time photographer. I'm not a full-time photographer. I'm a full-time speaker, an author, and filmmaker, and photographer, and advisor, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, those are all the hats I wear. When I was in my early 20s, 21, 2, 3, 4, I realized very quickly, I was like, wow, if all I have to offer these companies, these brands, these magazines that I was working for is just this one flavor of ice cream, they're going to get bored real quick. And so is the world around me. They're not going to care. I think as time's gone on, I realized that I needed to be armed with more tools than just photography. I need to be able to articulate what I love about this craft, what I love about these places. I need to be able to write a book from my heart and be vulnerable and share my story and my experience. I need to be able to make a film that touches on sensitive subjects and does so in a way that hopefully lifts up other people or voices or what have you. And I guess what I'm getting at is that those skills are kind of critical for, I think expanding beyond just being a photographer, because I don't know that nowadays photography is as celebrated as it once was, because everybody can be a photographer. So you need a perspective, you need a voice, you need an opinion. And I think you need to be a little polarizing, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's okay. People out there that just want to appease everybody and appeal to everybody, I think that that's dangerous. That's just like you're living in an echo chamber of ideas, because it's like everybody agrees with you, you know? And I think that what makes people interesting, the people that I really resonate with, the people that I like to hear and read and watch and feel inspired by, are the people who have opinions and who aren't afraid of them. And I admire that. And so I guess what I'm getting at here is that being expanding our offerings and being able to have multiple creative pursuits so that we don't get pinned down by one thing, because that's how burnout happens. If you're a photographer and that's all you do, and all you do is take photos, and your only way of experiencing the world or nature or beauty or expressing it is through photography, it's kind of like you have 4 teeth and you aren't even your mouth. It's like you can only chew food one way. So I aim to do that. And then I think when you take that and you apply it to social media, that's sort of what I love, is that I get a chance to, share an image and then share a video or share a book project or advocate for something else, or, you know what I mean? Like, there are a multitude of ways that I get to express things.
How about I've been talking to a few people that are very big on social media. One of them, Sorel Amor, I don't know if you know her.
Yeah.
And she was talking about how it can even change your brain chemistry once you become big on social media. Because there's this tendency of starting to, you have a big audience, so you start to do things according to that.
Yeah.
How have you managed to, ground yourself, even if you know that you can reach a lot of people?
That's an excellent question. I think that first off, it's important to not be a narcissist. I don't think there's any other way to put this other than you need to clearly define your intentions. And this is when I teach social media workshops. People think that they're going to a workshop to get the best 20 tips and tricks from Chris Burkard. And really, it's a lot about questioning your why. Why are you even doing this? Why are you putting art out into the world? Why are you creating art? What's the point? Why do you push the publish button? Is it to get a hit of dopamine? Is it so that you can feed some insatiable need to be liked? I don't know. I can't answer that for people. Is it because you want to pick up on chicks? Is that why you want to meet girls? You're a guy on social media shooting photos and, you really want to just meet other people. That's okay. These are all okay. I'm giving full permission for people to have one of those topics be their need. But I think that we need to be honest with ourselves as to why, right? If I was a creep and that was my goal, I could use social media for those things. If my goal was purely to make money, you would see me selling a lot more crap on social media. If my goal was to, facilitate X, Y, or Z, it really comes back to your why. And so ultimately I look at my why as, well, why did I start doing this? I have to go way, way, way back to figure that out. It's an introspective thing. My mom never traveled. I grew up in a single parent home before my mom got married. So it was me and my mom, and she sacrificed everything to have me at 17, which in the States is very young. Here, not so young. But I looked back at that, and when I started to travel, all I wanted to do is bring back those experiences to her. I wanted to come home and show her where I went, because she hadn't seen that. That was my why for everything I did before social media, way before. Because some people might not realize this, but there was photography before social media. we would just not share it. We would just wait for magazines. So I think that having a full-blown career, years and years and years of selling images and working prior to even having the Instagram app or Facebook, that helps define your why a little bit, because you have a purpose outside of that. So anyway, I felt really validated sharing those images with my mom and experiences. And when social media came around, I was like, wow, this can now be a byproduct to my storytelling. Because I was working for magazines. I was telling my stories there. I was selling photos, and then I would be able to share some of these hidden moments or these B moments, you know, that maybe not like the best shot. And then, of course, at a certain point, I was like, wow, my channel is bigger than these magazines. My channel is bigger than most of these brands. Like, I can share my own stories. And so that's what I do now.
But it's really, really interesting. I love what you're talking about, the why.
Yeah.
I think that's what, I mean, for people who are listening or watching, like that's what we all need to do very regularly. Like ask ourselves, even when you're talking about it now, I've been recently thinking about like my why in doing this. Yeah. And I've been thinking like, what am I trying to bring to society that can maybe do some good for somebody?
And you know what's crazy is like, I also don't think it has to necessarily do good. I mean, and I know that that's a hard thing to hear for people to listen to. I'm not saying that you should come to social media or create art. I just want people to create art for no other purpose other than it makes them happy. If a photographer, a young photographer, picks up a camera and is like, I'm going to change the world with this, that's a fucking burden to bear. That's a huge burden.
True.
Like, dude, I'm like, I picked up a camera because I just wanted to travel. I grew up in a small town, no passport, never left the US, and the camera was my tool to see the world. And oh my God, what an education it gave me. I was flabbergasted. I was humbled so quickly. And I just feel like over time, you develop things you love, places you care about, people you care about, and then you want to help those people or you want to advocate for, who knows? For me, it was a big part of my career was spent advocating for Iceland's glacial rivers and protecting those. And it's shifted. I've been involved in tons of nonprofits and NGOs and environmental, you know, acts to protect places. But that came from years of traveling and falling in love with places and feeling a sense of responsibility to want to protect them. I worry about people getting too obsessed with doing good that they forget about letting it make them happy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Do you feel like some of your best work has actually come? Alan Watts, the philosopher, talked a lot about
I love Alan,
doing things for the sake of doing them.
Yeah.
Because you love doing them.
Yeah.
And then maybe the outcome is going to be great for a lot of people.
Well, that's what's beautiful is like, again, if we're on social media and the goal is to go viral, or we're doing this because it's gonna get us paid, like that is a dangerous recipe, because you will suffer burnout, you know, and you will basically, like as Sorel was saying, which is an amazing, you know, way to analyze it. It'll change your brain. It'll change the reason why you do things, and your why will be intrinsically connected with the act of doing it, because you need this outcome and that defines your why, as opposed to your why, your purpose for being, for sharing. It should be, and again, this is not the gospel of social media according to Chris Burkard. This is just my life advice that I have learned over 2 decades of doing this or whatever. Like, it should come from a place of like, this helps me grow. This helps me learn. I enjoy this. I am becoming the best version of myself through this experience. To me, social media is nothing more than a glorified texting app. It is a communication tool.
Yeah.
So what I think about is, if all you're doing is you are the one texting, you are the one opening a door to your friend's house and saying, hey, just yelling this message, and then before they have the time to respond, you're closing the door. Well, that's only serving you. You're not actually reciprocating the communication. Like, exactly. If I didn't answer your DM, because there are photographers who like don't answer any of their direct messages, I'm like, what's the point? I literally use this because I like people. And I like people because I want to connect with people, and I want to have real conversations, and I want to show the world that I have ideas and thoughts and feelings that matter. And you do that by opening your mouth.
How about the access to yourself when your social media is that big? If a lot of people are contacting you, how about at some point you're like, I would love to, because I've had it on a very small scale when I released my last book. Yeah. So many people messaging me,
and you want to help all of them.
I want to help all of them. I love communicating, but at some point I was like, people have access to me almost all of my waking hours, and it's at some point I'm not protecting myself enough.
You hit on the most incredible topics. This is the one thing that I think that the world at large doesn't maybe fully recognize. And it's kind of that thing where, and this is going to sound so stupid, but it's kind of that situation where I meet somebody and they're like, oh, hey, I'm so-and-so. Like we talked on social media. I'm like, I don't know how to tell you this, but like, dude, I talk to thousands of people a day. Like my memory is like overwhelmed with people and faces and stories and this and that. And I'm trying to connect with as many of them as I can. But I think what I've done is I've learned boundaries. And the boundaries are that if somebody's asking me a real question, like with real intent, not something they could easily Google themselves, I will answer them. Yeah, I want to help you out. Like you want to know, what's the weather like in this part of Iceland in September or blah, blah, blah. I mean, I'll tell you, even though you could probably find that yourself. Or if there's an opportunity to really like share an experience with somebody or to lift up their day, like I want to do that. But there are some people you can't help. And there are a lot of people that just want to give you a pat on the back, and that's great, but I don't need to like start a full-blown conversation. But I do really appreciate direct messaging, and I do really appreciate the access. And I will say that as a photographer or a creative, what's interesting is that the brands and the companies, what they really want are people who are accessible, because 10, 20 years ago, it was totally the opposite. If you were a Nat Geo photographer, you would create a barrier around yourself, a wall around yourself so that nobody could reach you. And the more inaccessible you were, the more sought after you were. And I don't think it's the same nowadays, because I think there's a vulnerability and an openness that we see online. And that's where creatives thrive. They thrive in the space of sharing and offering information and being giving of it. Like, I find that to be very fulfilling for me. I want people to go and create what I've created so they can have the same feelings. Exactly. I'm not worried about creating competition for myself. That doesn't concern me. Because the thing is that photography is not hard. You and I could go to Skogafoss and shoot the same photograph, right? Like shoulder to shoulder. What's different is this, and this is like the most important thing that I tell people all the time, whether I'm in a workshop or whether I'm in any setting when people ask for advice. I've learned to not describe to people what they can already see. And what I mean by that is that when I'm writing a book, making a film, or sharing something on social media, what am I not going to do? I'm not going to tell people that this photograph is of a big waterfall in southern Iceland. Nobody cares. They know that. It's a disservice to those people. They have eyes. They can see it. What should I be telling them? Well, I was the creative. I made the image. I felt the wind at the back of my neck and the chill of the air, and my feet got wet, and I was sleepless because I drove there for the Northern Light. Whatever it was, you had this almost life-changing experience, and then to go there and to write it and share it with the world, and maybe you steal somebody else's quote, and you say, the mountains are calling and I must go. Like, what a disservice to yourself as an artist.
What about, like, I think people would say he's the best photographer out of the Icelandic photographers, at least in many people's eyes. Rax.
Yeah, of course.
And he I remember an interview with him where he said, I'm still looking for a good photograph from me. the one.
Yeah.
I'll be happy if I make one good photograph until I die.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about in the age of like ChatGPT, all of the apps, all of everything, is it still like there's, even with all the technology and everything, is there still something about a raw photo that you took with all of the aspects that you've been talking about, the wind blowing, like the sleepless night, something that there is some X factor there that can never be duplicated by any technology or anything else?
Sadly, my perspective is that I think that technology will duplicate that. Like, the best photographs I could ever make in my life are going to, at some point, be easily duplicated by AI. That's just what it is. So therefore, what can AI not duplicate? It can't duplicate this. Two people sitting, talking, sharing an experience. Like, I think that what people really are craving, and why podcast and podcasting is so valuable, is it shows the world that in the age of 6-second ads and short attention spans and everything, people still care about long-form conversation. They want to hear people talk about things and discuss things and dive deeply because we crave that. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I don't look at images and get super inspired. You know what I'd be more inspired by? I love watching that little mini series Rax was doing and where he was sharing the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Or when he writes a caption and he really dives deeply into where it was and what it felt like. And, you know, the grandpa's brother's son that took him out on the ice. And that just sticks with me. And that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm craving. Like, I don't get my thrills just scrolling through social media, seeing beautiful image after beautiful image. Like it's like eating candy, you know?
Yeah.
Like it always tastes good. It's not going to never taste good, but it kind of makes you sick.
Yeah.
You know, I want like a big nutritious meal. And that's kind of what I feel like, you know, opening Faces of the North, Rax's book did for me. Mm-hmm. I was like, holy shit. Like there's so much more to this. Like there's so much deeper work. And I thrive and crave that.
Yeah. By the way, I feel when I'm talking to you, like this is where I feel like I'm in my essence. I feel like we are having a really good conversation.
Yeah.
And in your craft, like for me, if I have a really good conversation and I feel the energy is really good, I'm just taking it as a given that there are going to be people who are listening and they are somehow not only hearing our words, they are getting what's going on in the studio.
Yeah, well, I would hope so. I mean, I genuinely feel like when I'm able to have an experience, an event, or do it, like you want to give of yourself to people, and I think it's a good sign. We talked about this earlier, like the well, and how do you set yourself up to kind of go on these longer trips or expeditions or whatever. I think that anything that requires vulnerability, which podcast should, conversation should, meaningful conversation should, there should be an energy exchange. And my wife loves this topic because she's way more into like the woo-woo-y stuff, you know, like not, you know, kind of like the witchcraft, whatever. But I'm coming around to it. I'm being more open to it now. But I do feel like there is an energy exchange. You know, you're giving of your thoughts and emotions and feelings, and you're kind of letting the ego down, the ego walls down. And you're like, I'm in a safe place. I can really share. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of my bar for like, was it meaningful? My sort of the bar that I set for myself when I ask myself, like, was that meaningful? Is, did I get emotional? Did it open a part of me that wasn't open? That's like everything. Like I look at photography like that. Like when I was out there in Hornstrander and I was, you know, shooting photos, like, did I get emotional?
Yeah.
If you didn't, then were you really that vulnerable, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was on a concert yesterday night with a musician. She's called Fia.
Okay.
From Sweden. And she's like she's known in the spiritual community. And it's strange to say that there was a part of the concert where she stood on the stage and there was just, she stood there in silence in front of everybody. And at some point she was calling on her ancestors and it was like, I feel like everybody in there felt like something was going on.
Whoa.
And there was, and talking about the wooey stuff, which I think is more, women tend to be in general more intuitive.
They're more tuned in. You know, it's a funny thing, that concept, you know, we like to say, you know, like, yeah, women are more tuned in. I agree with that. But I also think that men aren't given permission to tune in as much. I don't think in Western society, where I come from, men are given as much permission to be sensitive, to be vulnerable. It's seen as weakness and it's seen as a lot of things. And I think that is, it's kind of beaten out of us at a young age.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad. Like it makes me really, really sad to think about, you know, and it's taken, years of therapy and you know, doing whatever, of yoga teacher training and different modalities of exploration into the self to kind of recognize that.
Did you do yoga teacher training?
I did, yeah. Years ago, I did, I got my 250 hours, and it wasn't because I wanted to teach yoga. It was because I was very interested in the mind-body connection, in breath work, in pranayama, in asana, and I wanted to learn about it. And I felt like, you know, you have this desire for deeper learning. And that desire for deeper learning usually at a certain point pushes you into a physical aspect, whether that is, learning how to be aware of your body more. Mm-hmm. And I think that being aware of your body is so critical. Not just like punishing yourself by riding long hours or by running ultra marathons or whatever. Like, of course, I have that masochistic quality. I love that stuff too. But man, when you go sit in like, I don't know, some, hip opener, deep hip opener, like it's emotional. It is emotional. And I don't know how to say it, but like I have cried more than I can count in yoga. And that's, I think what I love about it is I do yoga for the vulnerability practice and for that connection. If I want to go just sweat and lift weights, I'll go to the gym, but it's helpful, I think, for sure. Just alongside all the practices you were mentioning before, cold therapy and everything else. Yeah,
100%. But I'm thinking, like, I don't know why it comes to me now when I'm talking to you, like you talked about your dad.
Yeah.
And this blue collar, like working, providing. Yeah. And it's talking about Iceland, like our forefathers.
All the dads.
All the dads, like going out fishing, providing. Yeah. I feel like, and now I'm maybe getting a little bit wooey. There is a feminine wave in the collective psyche in the earth right now, where we are all being called to be more like this, I don't know how to say it, like in the Western world, this more greed, it's a little bit masculine. Versus, and I'm thinking like with your work, like when you've learned to say no to make more space, that's actually like, it's so different from how you were describing your dad. And I feel like that's maybe what's going on. I felt it sometimes for me, like I get rewarded if I allow myself to believe that things will come to me if I treat myself
if you
with care,
space
I put boundaries. I say I'm gonna have space to do good work instead of too much work. And I believe that in the end I will be rewarded.
I completely agree. I think that that is the recipe that we need, is to, if you don't open yourself up at all or create any space for the mystery to happen. Like I like to think of it in a little bit different way. Like I think about it sometimes with photography, for example, because it's a very tangible example. I'll have somebody who comes to me and they're like, I'm planning a trip here, and I really want to see this and this and this and this and this. And they have this big, long list. And I think that is excellent. It's great to be prepared. The more you know, the less you need, et cetera, et cetera. But isn't it interesting that in this day and age, the day and age of technology and social media and planning and Google Maps and everything, we kind of strip away the mystery of an experience. We strip away the space to have new experiences. I heard somebody come into my gallery down in Hafnatorg the other day, and they were like, I drove the ring road and I didn't meet a single Icelander, and I almost shit myself. Sorry, I was like, oh, that like hurts so bad because they kind of stripped away the opportunity to have any kind of mystery, any kind of different experience. It's almost like, somebody's on a safari and they're trying to check off the boxes. They saw all the big game. I would rather spend like a week with a giraffe, and just see it under all different conditions and appreciate it, as opposed to like, okay, well, I saw this and I saw that and I blah, blah, and you know what? It was great. Like, and then I'm speaking to this because I did that myself. When I first traveled, I went to Dubai and Yemen and Oman. It was the first international trip I did ever.
Really?
In my life. I was terrified. Like I had never been out of the US. I'm going to the Middle East. My parents were losing their minds. And it's funny because I filtered all these very intense, complicated experiences through my camera. Like anybody would look at me and I just like hold my camera up to my face because I'm like, oh, I need to take a picture of this, as opposed to connecting with them. And as opposed to like getting to know people. And, I was afraid of a lot of things, the language barrier, this and that, like my uncomfortability in those situations where I just didn't know how to be myself. I didn't even know myself. So therefore, how could I give of myself, to people or felt like I had anything to offer? And in many ways you don't, because you're dealing with people in extreme poverty in certain places and extreme wealth in others. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that I've been on that side of things where I haven't made any room for any growth to occur. And now it's different. And I think that there is, I love what you said, a feminine wave kind of coming over the earth where people are, trying to create more openness to feel and experience. And I do also see that in this community here in Iceland, where, you sort of took the words out of my mouth, but like the forefathers of everybody that I know, like they worked and there was real trauma, and there's generational trauma. And in fact, I've held people while they've been sobbing at times and heard them say like, I'm from the North. I'm not allowed to be sad. Like, and I just like, it breaks my heart hearing that, because first of all, because I know what that feels like, where you just like suck it up, move on, blah, blah, and you don't allow any of that emotion to escape. And I think that what's beautiful is that the more emotion we allow to escape, the more we look at that, like where's that coming from? Why am I feeling that? Why is this coming up for me over and over and over, whatever. It teaches you things about yourself you would never know. Like, you are your best teacher, but if we don't allow us to teach ourselves, then we don't learn anything. It's kind of crazy.
It is, but this I would say, like, this generational trauma in Iceland, it's very interesting. Like, there is so much going on in Iceland right now, even with psychedelics and everything. Everything in Iceland gets exaggerated. It's exaggerated how traumatic it was. Now it's exaggerated how much everybody's doing trauma work. And I when you were talking, I had this talking about being vulnerable and sharing things. Like yesterday night, me and my girlfriend were at my parents' place, and all of a sudden my dad, he fell and he started to cry. And then his mechanism has always been to push people away when he gets in that space, because there's a shame, like he's ashamed. And it's so typical of the old generation of Icelandic men. And then me and her, we went and gave him a hug, and his first reaction was to push us away, but then he just started to sob and cry more. And I was telling him, hey, it's okay, it's okay. He's like, so sorry, I'm so sorry. No. There's nothing to be sorry about. And in the end, it was so beautiful to see him. And then in the end, he said, like, I was never allowed to cry. I was never allowed to cry. I started to work when I was 6 years old. 6 years old.
Oh my God! I mean,
and I'm just thinking about the old guys in this country. Like,
and you get shipped off to a different part of the country, and to a farm that you don't know, to people that you don't know, and people look back on that and kind of romanticize it, like, the old times. And I'm like, whoa! Like it's kind of interesting to me how casually people talk about that. And I know that, again, a lot of people had great experiences. It made hard people and strong people 100%. And incredible people. And this is why we're here now, because Icelanders are survivors. Like, it is 100%. Incredible. Survivor mentality. I wish I had like a sliver of that. But it is crazy to me when people talk about it and maybe don't recognize or realize how, like, wow, that probably was traumatic. Like, it's traumatic. And I what's beautiful is I really appreciate those people that I've met where, like, they can acknowledge where hardship or trauma has come up for them, and just in how it's kind of played a role in their life, because it's okay to live with it. Like, it's okay to have that be a part of your life. It's okay to acknowledge, even for me, to take this back to art. Like, the best art is born out of trauma, I think, or recognizing whatever has made you. I again, as I said, like, I was a self-professed workaholic, and that's because I grew up with this idea that I wanted to prove to my parents and my mom that I was worth being here, like worth. And this sounds hard to say, but worth keeping. Because my mom had me, again, when she was 17. And I know it's maybe a different culture here, but in the States, abortion was a very real opportunity and topic and something that was considered. But instead, she kept me My biological father passed away before I was born. He died the year I was born, basically, before I came out. So my mom was dealing with my dad passing away. She's 16 years old.
Wow.
He's 16. She's dealing with this grieving and then has this kid. And it's just like, I just think back to that. And that experience has made me who I am. And it's not something I need to be ashamed of, but yet something I can acknowledge and maybe realize that it's created some bad habits, like a few, but it's also given me this incredible drive. And I think looking at it now and being more comfortable with it, I'm in a much better, healthier place. But to be totally honest, that perspective has come through, again, therapy and psilocybin therapy as well. Yeah. Trying to just get in touch with myself and. Yeah.
What does psilocybin do for you? I've also worked with psilocybin.
Yeah. Well, I saw an incredible therapist for a couple of years in California, and his name was Jay, and he's from India, and he had recommended to me to use it, and I never ever probably would have touched it or picked it up or anything, but he was like, this is something that could really benefit you in a therapeutic situation. Like, we will do it together. This is a therapeutic thing. Like, I am going to, as your therapist, recommend this. And it was funny because I feel like I needed that permission. Like, I've never been like alcohol, drugs, never really been my thing. I just, I felt like I was too driven to work at a young age to like bother with any of that. And also from like a religious perspective, it just wasn't anything I wanted to do with. But this was different. This was like healing. And I went all in, and it changed my life. I directly feel like my decisions and where I am sitting now, where I am in life, is directly related to that. I would say that getting married, having my first child, and doing mushrooms were probably the three most significant things.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I feel bad for my second kid, but I mean, his birth was great too, but the first is always the most unique. Yeah.
But you talked about creativity before, and I feel like there's a certain, when I've done psilocybin in pretty high dosages, I access the part of my brain that's behind my fight or flight, that's behind like my conditionings.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is like pure creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I feel like that happens. And what I noticed too is just all my well-worn pathways, the way I think, the way I operate, the way I respond when somebody makes me upset or mad or hurt or whatever. Like, every one of us is like a castle, and around our minds and around our hearts specifically, we have a moat. A waterway with a big drawbridge and a bunch of spikes and all those things. And that I like to think about that as the ego, and the ego has to come down in order for the soft, vulnerable parts of you to be accessed, And I think that that's what's so beautiful about that experience is it gave me permission to just be in my feelings. And it's almost like you feel like you're drowning, when you're like, as a young man, a young Westerner, where, your capitalism is kind of ingrained in you, and you are an entrepreneur, and you are strong, and you're blah, blah, and, you can't show emotion. It's like, it's, I don't know, it feels like drowning when you feel emotion, and you don't know how to express it. And I think this gave me permission to do that.
What about, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the ultra running and the cycling and stuff like that. Like, where does that come from? Like, do you feel like when you do an ultra run, for example, I was interviewing one of the best ultra runners in Iceland, and he was saying like,
which one? Which guy?
Sigurjón Ernir.
Okay, yeah.
And he was saying like, when I run like 100 kilometers or something, and with uphill also, I might be going through 3 years worth of experience in this one run.
Beautiful.
Like emotionally, like I might cry, I feel a bliss, I go towards a dark period where I feel like, how is it gonna be when I die? And at the end of it, I feel like I have maybe gone through the emotions that a regular person might go through in 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely. He nailed it. I mean, that's beautiful. You know what? I've articulated it in a slightly different way, that for me, and I always say for me, because I feel like all I can do is speak to my experience, really. But you know what it does is it's not just ultra running. I think it's any endurance experience. And I will say, I want to caveat this by just saying, like, as human beings, that is our greatest skill, endurance. We cannot run faster than most animals. We can run longer.
True.
We can outrun a cheetah because we can run longer. We can track it down. I guess what I'm getting at is we are built for endurance. It is a part of us. People, men, women, would go out to hunt and gather 4 days. You would go without food. Like, this is a part of who we are. It is built into our DNA, our muscle fibers, everything, the way we process meals. It's really incredible. It's incredible what human beings can do. I kind of came into endurance sports by mistake. It wasn't because I had some desire to prove to myself that I was a great athlete, but I spent a lot of time documenting the best athletes in the world. And at a certain point, you kind of are like, wow, I really want to be doing some of these things myself. Maybe I want to put myself in the arena, to experience what that feels like. And I guess, sometime in my late 20s, I was kind of like fed up with just grinding in photography and not really exploring this other part of me, because obviously I had to dabble in all these sports slightly, but I didn't really have one for me, and what would happen is, like, I loved surfing, but I started to shoot surfing, and then that becomes a work, I loved climbing. I used to go to Yosemite and climb big walls in Yosemite, and then I started shooting climbing, and it kind of like you lose some of that joy. And so I wanted to kind of do something that was just for me. And I started getting into cycling mainly because I was commuting to work. And I started to realize, like, wow, what a cool way to experience my town. I'm seeing it in a different way. I started to go back to landscapes that I loved and seeing it in a different way and spending more time there. And, like, it's a joy. It's a gift. That's really why I love it. And running is the same thing. I think with running, you're a little more connected with your body because you're feeling things a little more. Cycling is always kind of a hard effort and then no effort, and hard effort because you're going uphill or downhill, right? Most of the time. But with both of those, it allows you to cover a lot of terrain. You're seeing a lot. You're experiencing a lot. You're fully immersed. You're smelling everything. The weather changes. It gets more humid. You feel it. It gets more cold. You feel it. You're going through that whole range. But to get back to the point, what I think it does and why it's so enticing is that it strips away all the superfluous BS, the bullcrap from life. Because at a certain moment, you start to get back to the primary needs: food, water, shelter. Yeah. Am I safe? That's shelter. Am I safe? Right? Food, I'm hungry. I need food. Water, I need this to survive. Food, I could probably go without, but water is like, and you get to that place. You will. Absolutely. I promise it on my life. Every athlete gets to that place. And what happens is you become the most primal, raw version of yourself. And what I think is special about that is that all the conditioning that we've had in society to be kind, and to be gentle, and to do this, and to speak like this, and to talk like this, and to answer emails like this, and to respond like this, that goes out the window. And it's so refreshing. And sometimes I tell my wife, I'm like, hey, the way I spoke to you on the phone when you called me and I was at mile, 500, 2 days no sleep. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I just want you to know now, like, I'm not going to be, I'm going to just tell you what I need, and I'm going to be more expressive. And I think, like, the world needs a bit more of that. Yeah. They need a bit more of that. And you can find it in a lot of different ways. I think that smarter people, maybe less cavemen, like people like myself, can probably find it in more easy ways. Maybe they can, drink cacao and find it. I don't know, or do yoga. But I love that place that you get to where you just become very raw. And I think in that rawness, in that primalness, what is important becomes crystal clear. What is relevant, and it's not emails. It's kind of like being on your deathbed. And I think that's why I love it. Like, I love the fact that what is important in life rises to the surface and everything else just kind of falls away. It's really beautiful. Like, I relate to what he's saying, because I've been in the high, the low. I'm thinking about my kids. I'm questioning, like, am I a good dad? Blah, blah, like all these things. Like, I'm crying. It's therapy. It's beautiful.
When you went through the WOW Cyclathon, and you won it, like, did you go through a phase, because that was that was throughout all the night, right?
Yeah.
Did you go through a phase where you're starting to hallucinate? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was hallucinating. I mean, when people talk about hallucinating, you're not like, seeing cars that aren't there. You're usually just like, you're kind of like looking out on the horizon and it's a little shaky, or you're seeing things that feel like, like you double take a lot. You're like, whoa, did I just see that? It's not like your vision is totally impaired. I just think it's important for people to realize, like, you're still riding your bike and you need to be safe. When I did the WOW Cyclathon in 2017, something like that, 18, I can't remember. It's funny because the single reason I wanted to start doing endurance riding was because of that ride. I loved Iceland. I'd been here, 30 times, whatever. And I was like, what if I could experience this place in a different way? Like, what if I could experience it in a way where it's totally human powered and it's just all my own energy and emotion and and I don't know. I was like, it was just a big what if. And I trained my ass off, and I trained and I trained, and I came, and I felt like I was just so focused. Like, I've never felt more focused in my life. I don't think I stopped to pee or got off my bike for 11 or 12 hours. And
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I remember getting to Egilsstaðir, and it was like 22 hours or something. I had ridden like 400 miles in 22 hours. The first part of the ride was incredible. I had a great tailwind. The second part of the ride was atrocious. I had terrible headwind and rain and cold and just, so brutal. Like, my body paid for it in the second. I've always dreamt of doing it again, trying to do it under 50 hours or 50 hours, which I think would be, somebody could do it, but.
What was your time when you
52 hours. I think 52 hours, 40 minutes, something like that. I mean, I think it's possible. You just need good weather.
Yeah.
But man, what a beautiful experience. And I still love, endurance sports is still a big part of my life. I definitely don't consider myself an athlete, really. Like, I just enjoy those things. And I do really admire people that, like, can create a life around that, Because for me, it's always just an accessory to work and everything else.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about photography.
Yeah.
Like, do you have talking about what I was saying about racks, do you have like a favorite photograph, or where you've been like, yeah, that's it?
It's interesting because I do have some favorite photographs. Most of them are favorites because of what they represent and what they mean. And I guess that oftentimes when people ask me, like, oh, where's your favorite place you've been? I'm like, it was the last place I was. My favorite place I've been is Norway, because I was just there, and all the feelings are very still on the surface. Like, it's still on the tip of my tongue. I'm still kind of sweating it out, if you know what I mean. And so typically when I think about photos, like, my favorite photo is the last photo I shot. But if I'm being honest and I'm thinking about it, there's a photograph of a surfer in remote Alaska, these islands called the Aleutian Islands. It's a chain that goes from Russia, Kamchatka, Russia, to Alaska. And they're a big, beautiful arc across the top of the Ring of Fire. Each one of them has a massive volcano on it. And they're these barren, kind of remote islands, tundra. And I went there on a trip for Surfer Magazine years ago, an expedition that I planned with a friend of mine. And it was one of those places where, you're looking online and you're like, what is even here? Like, are we even going to find waves? Like, can you even surf in this body of water? Like, had no idea. He didn't even know that there was this beautiful volcano on the island. And one morning we woke up in this like hunting cabin, got on our quads, ATVs, and did the long, cold ride to the beach. And it was crystal clear that day. And we literally, as we were driving, just this perfect volcano covered in snow emerged from like the skyline. And we get down to the beach and there's waves, and I just, all those feelings of feeling like, wow, like it was worth it. Like all of this time and investment and energy and money and convincing editors and convincing my wife and people that like this trip is going to be worth it. I mean, I've had so many experiences like that. Shooting under the Northern Lights in Northern Iceland, surfers, like that was one of the craziest experiences of my life. That could easily be one of my favorite photos too, because of what it represents, because of the fact that this was a risk, the greatest risk you could ever gamble on, and to have it come to life. It wasn't just like a couple of random friends showing up there hoping to, you know, get some waves and, oh, look, this happened. It was a thought out experience that was the byproduct of a lot of people like putting energy in and risking things and knowing everything that we went through to create that. Those are the ones that really mean something to me. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that are significant. And they also just so happen to sometimes be the more beautiful images, right? But that's what's challenging is like, it's hard for me to get excited nowadays about, you know, driving along the South Coast and just shooting. Yeah, I always call it like big game hunting. It's like these are all the big game animals, you know, Selellenfoss and Skogafoss and Thorsmork, and these places still get me so excited. But nowadays I get more excited taking people there who have never been there, taking my kids there, letting them, you know, play in those experiences. Like that's what gets me the most stoked.
Do you feel like when you're talking about this Alaska, and I'm thinking about, so we talked about the drive you were talking about to Utah, like where you're mostly in concrete or traffic,
desert, truck stops,
to go somewhere where you truly are remote, like you're truly in the middle of nowhere. Does it give you a different perspective on Earth?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I'm probably the most guilty of this. I like to, you know, be like, I always tell people, or I'll write captions like, oh, on this remote beach in Northern Iceland or remote beach in Norway. I'm like, those places aren't remote. I don't know what to tell you, but like Iceland is not that remote. Like you're at any point, you're what, 8 hours from the capital? Like you're only so far from a rescue. You're only so far from a town or a service or a ISAR to help you, bail you out. In places like the Kuril Islands off the coast of Russia or the remote islands of Alaska, you feel alone, very alone and insignificant, and it's scary. It's what makes a place like this scary is how quickly the weather can change and how quickly, like, you know, excuse my language, but the shit can hit the fan. You know, in Iceland, that's what makes it so dangerous and so unique. And you can very quickly be isolated, you know, by yourself in the highlands or on a glacier or whatever. But in terms of actual remoteness, like geographically remote, those places, like you mentioned, they do give you a sense of, I don't know, emptiness, yet profound kind of joy at the same time. You know, you sort of question your humanity a little bit. You're just out there like, I don't matter. You know, I'm insignificant, you know? And I don't know, it's a funny feeling thinking about this day and age where almost like we question or we ask ourselves maybe like, well, what's the point of shooting this or documenting this if we can't share it, right? Back then, I kind of have to remind myself the fact that I would go on these trips and nobody would see the photographs for months. I would just have to live with that experience like a psychopath, you know? Like I couldn't even talk about it or share it or tweet it or anything. I just had to like sit there and stare at the photos and ponder it. And you know, I think it gave me a lot more time to reflect on like what that meant, what it felt like, why I went there. You know, I'd come home and I'd be like, you know, kind of hard to deal with, or like giving my wife the cold shoulder. And, you know, I would have to work through the fact that I felt so scared at times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a different thing. And I think that it taught me a lot. And I don't travel to places like that often these days, you know?
Do you have any place on earth that you would like to visit and photograph?
You know what? This will sound kind of wild, but there are a million places I would like to visit, and there are a million places I'd love to photograph. But my bucket list of where I wanted to go, like where I dreamt of going, I've been lucky enough to fulfill almost all those places. The Kurils, the Aleutians, having gone back to both those places multiple times. Alaska, the Norway, the Faroes, Greenland, Iceland, like those, Patagonia. I feel like my heart is there. My heart is in these more Nordic, more Arctic countries. And I love the tropics, spent a lot of my life visiting those places, but I didn't find what I was searching for there. And I think that there is a recipe for a landscape. I'm looking for a place with a lot of vertical relief, meaning the mountains meet the sea. And it's like this dramatic meeting, it's like, boom, they're just, and you can find that here. Yeah. And I love that. I love that you can find that here and in these places that I listed. The places that I still dream of going are just financially super tough to get to. That's the problem, is like you start upping the ante, and to a certain point you're like, well, I need to be on a scientific vessel that's going to go to this place. They go once every 2 years. It's a 60-day expedition. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that, and it kind of sounds silly, but it's sort of why I haven't gone to Antarctica. I haven't had a desire. And I also think a lot about my two things, my carbon footprint, first of all, but secondly, I just don't really like to go to places where I don't have a purpose. If I'm just going there to take beautiful pictures, that doesn't feel meaningful enough. I want to go somewhere where I have a job to do or a story to tell. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean by a job. It's like, it's meaningful. I'm going to share a perspective, an experience. That doesn't mean that other people shouldn't go there. They should for sure, but it's just me. I also, it's funny, you mentioned earlier, you've been to 60 countries. Yeah. That's incredible. That's way more than me. Way more. Mm-hmm. I haven't been to that many countries. In my career, I started going back to places, Norway 7 times, Alaska 7, 8, 9 times, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, over and over, Australia. I was revisiting places over and over. And I think that I had recognized at a certain point that when I would go to those new places, new countries, it's a dopamine hit. You get off the plane and it's like, whoa, the smell, the sight, the food, I want to try that, and I'm just kind of reacting to the world around me, and I don't feel like I get to kind of settle in. And I think that's what I've learned is I want to be just, and this is just the world according to Chris. I don't want to take away anything from anybody, but for me as a storyteller, when my job is kind of focused on this, I need to kind of feel like I'm going more deep and immersive as opposed to more broad and shallower, because I just don't think that I deliver the work that I can or need to when I'm kind of skimming the surface. My first trip to Greece, for example, it was just for a photo shoot for Prana. I was shooting a massive catalog, and you're going here, you're going there, you're going to Klimnos and Zakynthos and blah, 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 and whatever. It's just it feels like you're just scraping the surface and you're not really getting deep and immersive. And so that's kind of what brought me back to wanting to come to Iceland was coming back over and over and finding people that I cared about and places that I fell in love with and environmental initiatives I wanted to support, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's sort of what this is a direct manifestation of that deep relationship.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So nice to have you on.
Dude, so good. Grateful to be here, man. Yeah.
Been a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.